Good evening. Chaperein is just now Shkia, so we'll say a capital Tilim and have in mind the Chayli Yisrael, particularly Dvair Leah, Bas Hena Rivka, Matech Shar Chayli Yisrael for Shlema. Lam Natsech Mizra David Yan Chadinay V'Yem Torah Yasagev Chashem Elihei Yaakov Yishlach Ezra Chami Kodesh Amitzio in Yisadeka Yizker Kol Min Chaysecha Ve'Las Chaydash Nasela Yitem L'Chol Chil V'Alvecha V'Chol Atzasecha Yimale Neranena B'Shua Secha V'Shem Eloheinu Nidgel Yimale Adinoi Kol Mishale Secha Ato Yadati Ki Heishia Adinoi Meshichoi Ya'anehu Mishmei Kodshe B'Gvoris Yeshe Yeminoi Eile Varechev Ve'ele Vasusim V'Anachnu V'Shem Adinoi Eloheinu Nazkir Hey Makoru V'Nafolo V'Anachnu Kamnu V'Nis Oidod Adinoi Yeshua Melchi Anenu Yin Karinu. Okay. Right, so let's go straight to our questions. The first question which we have is a particular Beis Chabad, a very northern post, and talking about slichus. Well, northern is not the issue. It works out that his chatzos in that place works out at 1:30 a.m. and is wondering whether there's a way of making an earlier slichus for the first night of slichus. So let's go through first of all, we have from the Sefer HaMinhagim. So we have here slichus ha'alef. The first slichus is maschilin achar uvesomoch lechatzos laila. Begins shortly after midnight. The other days we do slichus in the morning. So this is written by the Rebbe, and then he has a footnote which he's speculating. So the Rebbe, what happened with many of these minhagim, that in our Rebbe saw fit that there should be like a united, that all Chabad should be all over following the same minhag. And in order to do so, he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, his father-in-law, many, many details, and the Rebbe would publish them in various contrasting, which were published at the time. So he puts on record, this is the minhag. The first slichus is said shortly after midnight. Then in the note, he writes, Kanira, he's speculating. Why is it this so? Why do we want to say slichus at midnight? Why can't we say slichus first thing Sunday morning, early Sunday morning? Because one of the central poems of this first slichus is b'motzoi menucha, so it should be Motzei Shabbos. Ve'ein oimrim slichus v'yud gimel midas koidem chatzos laila. So he points here to something about not saying slichus before midnight. Now let's explain this. There is a concept of chesed and gevura, and nighttime is a time of gevura, a time of dinim perhaps. For this reason, we don't say tachnun at night. We do have vidui in Krishma Shalamita, but tachnun, I'm not totally clear what's exactly how to draw the line between the two. But that's that I'm just seeing what's written in Sforim, that tachnun is not said by night. So after mincha, after shachris, we have tachnun, but we do not have tachnun at night because night is a time of dinim, and tachnun would be arousing dinim. We don't want to compound dinim with dinim. According to the Zohar, well, this is all Zohar kind of stuff in any case, there's a difference between before chatzos and after chatzos. Until chatzos is a time of dinim, and then from chatzos onwards is like an upbeat kind of whatever, atmosphere might be the right word. So when after chatzos, you can already say you'd go midas and slichus, etc. This is true for every night of the week of slichus, that we would not say slichus at night because of dinim. Then comes another aspect which the Rebbe doesn't. By the way, this reference which we have here, Tov Kuf Chof Hey, is a mistake. It's, I think it's Tov Kuf Nun Hey in the middle of Hilchos Tanias. But that's where this Magen Avraham is. In addition, we have the inyan of Shabbos, and we know on Motzei Shabbos we don't say slichas, we don't say tachnun until midnight. If you are one of those people who are late nighters, so then if you say Krishma Shalamita after Chatzos, then you should be saying tachnun or whatever vidui. But there is a kind of an overflow of Shabbos until midnight. So we've got two reasons why we don't say slichas before midnight. One is because of any night is in of Gevura, of Dinim, plus on Shabbos, on Motzei Shabbos. Now, let's take a look at these various sources which we have over here. This is the Sharit Tshuva. Now, Tov Kuf Pei Aleph is the first siman of Hilchos Rosh Hashanah. It's missing the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, but this is the Sharit Tshuva on the margin of the Shulchan Aruch, where he says the following: Kosa Birkei Yosef Mishem Aram Zakuta B'Tshuva Sheyesh Mekoymes She'oimrim Slichis Be'arvis. Rav Moshe Zakuta is, I think, 2 generations after the Arizal, and he says, I've heard of some people doing slichas at night. Yishtaka hadover. This should be totally suppressed. She'ein roy lahaski yud gimel midas ki im be'es rotzen. The mention of the arousal of the yud gimel midas has to be in a time which is an auspicious time. If you happen to be in shul and they're saying slichas, don't join in. So he adds this inyan of Motzei Shabbos. So here we have one source. The Magen Avraham, which we just referred to, you can see here on the side. That's what the Rebbe refers to over here, because apart from Yom Kippur. So no, we don't do tachanun of sorts at night until Chatzos. Okay. Now you're going to ask, but there are many fine Jews who do slichas before midnight. Certainly in the, should we say, the modern Orthodox community, they will do a midnight slichas at 12 o'clock, which is actually an hour before midnight. And apparently in the Gera community also, they will do slichas after 10 o'clock, after 11 o'clock. And the source for the leniency in this is actually, interestingly, from the Alter Rebbe. In the Seder of Tikkun Chatzos, Tikkun Chatzos is meant to be at midnight. The Alter Rebbe says, if you can't make it at midnight, at least Ashmoiro Hoemtsois. The night, as we all learn in Gemara Brochas, is divided into 3 guards, three sections. And so the Alter Rebbe says, the middle section is already considered close to Chatzos. So he allows a person who can't do Tikkun Chatzos at midnight, he says, you can do Tikkun Chatzos from, let's say, 10 o'clock. I'm talking about 10 o'clock GMT. So he says 2 hours before would be the beginning of the middle section of the night. He said it's okay. So there seems to be a certain leeway on the concept of dinim by Laila, that already once you're in Ashmoira Emtsois, the middle Ashmoira, there is already leeway to say slichas, etc. Let's just take a look here. This is from Piskei Teshuvos. He also writes about not doing before Chatzos. There are those who do condone when necessary to do slichas before midnight, but it should be which is about 2 hours before Chatzos. So that's the background. So there is a certain amount of leeway that 2 hours before Chatzos one could do already slichas. I don't know whether that solves the problem of Motzei Shabbos. I don't think so. But what I told this Ingeman, this shliach, I said, listen, there is a heter to do slichas before chatzos. My question to you is, as a shliach in a Chabad house, does it make sense for you to have a minyan for slichas at a time which is not according to minhag Chabad? I felt it was like a bit strange to. Slichas is not the most. It's not an elo or anything like that, and they won't have slichas. But if you'll have to make slichas in Chabad house, not according to minhag Chabad, I felt that was a bit strange. Okay, let's go on to our next thing. Okay, so I have my slot on duty in the base Hero so every Friday. So I got a call from someone. Are you allowed to say thank you upon receiving a loan? We know you're not allowed to give ribis. You're not allowed to give a bonus for a loan. Someone gives you £100, you mustn't give them £101. You mustn't give the lender mustn't receive a bonus from you, more than he gave. So what about a thank you? So we've got here, let's read this from the Alter Rebbe Shechnor Chichas Ribis. There's a concept of the three levels in ribis. There's ribis ketzutza, then there's avak ribis, and then there's ribis mukdemes mocheres, which means that the loan, that the ribis, let's say you gave the person a box of chocolates in appreciation. That's called the ribis mocheres. It's also not allowed, but it's also midrabbanan. But then you have even to say a good word because of the loan, or because you want to expand the duration of the loan. So to dibur toiv is also not allowed. Kagoin lahakdim lo sholem, to go out of your way to wish the person good morning. If you weren't used to previously making a point of going out of your way to say good morning to this fellow, now he's giving you a loan, mitamol, you're giving him extra covered, that would not be allowed. That's called ribis devarim. To start praising the person, or to thank him and to how do you translate this? I think it should be translated as I owe you a favor. I appreciate. What does it mean to appreciate a favor? Means that when you'll need something, I will do something for you. I believe that's what it means. I acknowledge that I've received a favor from you. To give him a blessing for the loan, or you gave him an extension. So we have here a concept of ribis devarim. So it looks like, as you read this, it looks like lohoidos, to thank. It seems to be that even to say a thank you is usher. And so there are people who say I would say thank you, but the Torah doesn't allow me to do it, or something on those lines. But that, I'm not totally sure whether, because the Alter Rebbe says lohoidos or lahachzik lo toivo. It's a little bit more than just a thank you, which is just etiquette. It is to say I appreciate and I owe you one. I might be, but I'm not sure about this translation. And here's a very interesting development. Rabbi Singer is writing to owe a debt of gratitude. Those words. What does it mean, lemaisa? So I'm suggesting that it means that there's something. I'm indebted to you. Okay. Now, what happened is that Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach had been asked this question: can you say thank you for a loan? And he had answered that it's just an Indian of etiquette, and he had said it's okay. So then, this letter is written to Reb Yosef Menachem Mendel Rappaport. Perhaps now our Mancunian listeners will confirm that this is an elder brother of Reb Chaim Rappaport, a son of Reb Shneur Zalman, a Rappaport of Crumpsall. who is an expert is specialized in dinim of ribbis. So this Rabbi Rappaport had written to Reb Shlomo Zalman, and Reb Shlomo Zalman responds to him. He's saying, thank you for your comments. And he says, I published in the journal Moria. He had published an article, which later was published in the Sefer Minchas Shlomo. And then right afterwards, he says, Miyad Noidali, after he had published the article, he was told that the Alter Rebbe says, you're not allowed to say thank you. I had thought it's just, it's a praise, it's that kilo subracha hu de osur, to praise the person. I thought that is the isur, because people enjoy a praise. Therefore, that's ribas dvorim. But to take a free loan without any payment, and just to totally ignore the fact that the malver has gone out of his way to lend you, he felt it's not derech eretz, and he felt it was inappropriate. Therefore, I thought that just to acknowledge that you understand that he's doing you a kind chesed, he felt that was okay to say a thank you. But then he was alerted to, Reb Shlomo Zalman says, I was alerted to the Alter Rebbe, who says that you're not allowed to say thank you. Right away, I added on the margin that I retract what I had said, that you are allowed to say thank you. And I retract because of the Alter Rebbe. For some reason, when it came to printing the Sefer Shulchan Minchas Shlomo, so the copyist didn't copy my comment from the margin that I retracted. And that's in Shulchan, so in Minchas Shlomo, volume 1, he says that you are allowed to say thank you for a loan. I'm truly sorry about this. Many people have heard from me, shechazarti. They'd heard already that I'd retracted from my allowing to say thank you for a loan. In other words, I take now the position you're not allowed to say thank you for a loan. And they asked me, why when it came to when it was printed in the Sefer, when printed in the journal of Moria, I understand, but since then, until it was printed in the Sefer Minchas Shlomo, why wasn't it corrected? So here's a fascinating development where Reb Shlomo Zalman had said, you are allowed to say thank you for a loan. Someone points out to him that the Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch that you're not allowed to say thank you. And he writes his whole letter of kind of a very apologetic. And he says, no, you're not allowed to say thank you. Rabbi Elu is writing, I heard that if the borrower says thank you, the lender should answer him thank Hashem, possibly he meant to say. All right, let's move on to the next question. Okay, here is a question that one of the Batei Chabad here in England wanted to produce a fundraising video, and they consulted they got the services of a fellow in America who many shluchim are using, and then they receive Rabbi Elu is saying that if the borrower says thank you, so if the lender says thank you back, so then he's kind of returned what he's received. Okay, very nice. Okay, so let's come back to our question, which we're dealing with. So they receive an email on Motzei Shabbos, in which there's the video, and it's quite apparent that the video was produced on Shabbos. So they feel quite upset about this, that they're there to promote Yiddishkeit, and they're using a video which was produced by a Yid on Shabbos. So they're asking whether they're allowed to use it. They ask whether they're allowed to pay him. So here we have the din in Shin Yud Ches, the din of cooking on Shabbos, and it's the opening halacha. Hamavashel b'Shabbos, one who cooked on Shabbos or did another malacha b'mezid, the one who cooked on Shabbos or other malachas, osu lo le'olam lehonis moisim malacha mishum knas. There's a penalty that he is not allowed to have any benefit from the malacha. So if someone wrote on Shabbos, painted a picture, painted a wall, whatever it may be, if a person did a violation of Shabbos knowingly, so then there's a penalty. He's not allowed to have benefit from it. Furthermore, that the pot which was used for cooking is also forbidden because it's got now absorbed. Let's digress for a moment. I have this question: if a person becomes a Baal Tshuva, he used to boil the kettle on Shabbos, well, it's not, and now he becomes a Baal Tshuva. So how do you kasher a kettle, which is well, it's got boiled water in it? Does it? All right, so that's a side issue. But what's important for our conversation is other people are allowed to have benefit from this violation after Shabbos. There's no time, there's no limit on time. But the important point is, af im bishel bishvilo. Here the Alter Rebbe is saying, even if the cooking was done for this customer, that customer is allowed to have benefit from the melacha. So here, that's basically the answer. The professional who produced the video on Shabbos is obviously not doing the right thing, but for the customer here, they are allowed to have benefit from it after Shabbos, even though it was made for them. I'm going to just digress for a moment that this is a big issue in Eretz Yisrael, where you have buses half an hour after Shabbos. For the bus to be, let's say, by the Koisel, half an hour after Shabbos, means that it left the depot, and it means that the driver had to get to the depot. So a whole parsha in Eretz Yisrael about transportation, using transportation, which obviously involves Chilul Shabbos in preparatory stages. Similar flights which are leaving Motzei Shabbos. For a flight to leave on Motzei Shabbos, for a flight to leave, it has to be a few hours preparation. So the whole parasha, which is beyond our discussion here. But so the point which maybe the point is, if it's a seder that every week they're doing melacha and you're going to benefit from it, that would be more of an issue. Here it's like a one-off situation, so then one can be more makel to use the article which was made on Shabbos. Now, there is a bit of a contradiction to this from Hilchos Yom Tov, where in Hilchos Yom Tov it says that if someone had done some violation of Yom Tov, and it says the machol ma'osu for him ulachol anshe beisei, for his whole family. So there seems to be a bit of a contradiction here between the Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Shabbos, where it says that when it's osur for the violator, it's permitted for other people, even though it's done for them. And in Hilchos Yom Tov, he seems to be saying it's osur for l'chol anshe beisei. There may be a difference between anshe beisei and someone who's not a family member. I'm not sure, but it's the question is an old question and not a clear answer. Let's go on to the next question. Okay, I got a question from Paris, that there was a baby born, a baby boy, and for various medical reasons, the Bris won't be able to be done in the near future. So what happens about the naming? So there's two things. There's a Bris, which is, we know what a Bris is. And the Bris occasion is also used for naming the baby, maybe baby boy. If the Bris is not going to be happening in the near future, what do we do? So I've got here a sefer from Rabbi Zusha Wilhelm called Ziv Hashemes, and he writes the following: Mi she'ef shalamuloi bizmanoi, where the bris could not be performed on time. So there are various minhagim when to give the name. Some say koyin lo shem, just like with the girl, father has an aliyah, and you make a mishaberach. Yesh oimrim, there are those who say better to give the name before he becomes chayiv with the bris, because there's some kind of thing, there's some kind of concern that to give a Yiddish name and the child is an oral, some kind of concern about that. So perhaps before 8 days, so it's not called an oral yet. So you give them a name then. Some will not give a name, even if it takes a few weeks. In this case, I felt that to say that they should wait, leave a baby without a name for a whole year, I felt that it's unreasonable. It's not practical. And that's why, so perhaps we discussed not long ago, there was a case where they wanted to do a baby naming and there was going to be a delay of about 6 weeks. There I felt they should wait. But here, when it's a whole year, I felt that it's unreasonable. I said they should make a mishaberach and give the baby a name. And they can choose either to make it more public or less public. They don't have to make a mishaberach. They can just give it a name without a public announcement. But didn't feel it was correct to delay for such a long time. Let's move on. Someone from France, he sent me this question. He's in shul, and let's say he's in one room, and he hears in the next room they're saying kedusha, etc. Is he obliged? He's sitting and learning in the second room of the shul, in the B'cheda Sheni. Does he have to stop to answer kedusha, etc.? My immediate response was that I had asked this question to Reb Zalman Shimon when I was learning 770. Reb Zalman Shimon was alive then. He passed away, Tov Shimon Hey. And I asked him, what do we do? And I mean, we're just sitting and learning in the back of 770, and there's minyanim one after the other. So he gave me an answer. There's a similar discussion in Gemara about Kriyas HaTorah. I think it's Reb Zera, and he says, Anam bedidan ve'inu beditu. We're doing our thing, they're doing their thing. So when I'm asked this question, my take on it is the following. If there's someone saying Kedusha a very loud chazan, you're sitting there and you're obviously ignoring it, I felt that would be inappropriate to ignore. But if it could be seen that you didn't really hear properly, didn't hear that the Kedusha is being said, so you continue learning, that would be okay. Certainly if you're in the next room, then it's up to you. So now this I've taken from a sefer, as you can see, from a sefer Isha Yisrael, which is a specialist sefer about halachos of davening. And he says, on the one hand, Machitza Shel Barzel doesn't intervene, doesn't block between Yidden and the Father in heaven. Therefore, you are allowed to answer Kedusha, which are said, there's a minyan saying Kedusha, you are allowed to, even if you are in another room and you don't see anyone. If you can hear, you're allowed to. So now, but then in the note, which is important to us, from Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he infers from the Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch, you are allowed to answer. You're able to answer. It says you're passing by behind a shul and you hear Kedusha being said, it says Yochel Lanus. The fact that Shulchan Aruch uses the word Yochel means that you're not Mochuy, you're not obliged. So so that's just kind of confirm what I just said, that that it's optional. And if you find it as it's going to be disturbing you, you are allowed to continue learning without having to stop to answer Kedusha, etc. It's up to you. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so here the next question is, it came up this week that a particular donor, somewhere in Europe, I don't know his address, so don't ask me, he decided to send a box of wine to a whole number of shluchim around Europe. But the wine he's going to send is not mavushal wine. So now, what can you do with non-mavushal wine in a Beis Chabad? So here's the question for yourself. For personal use, you can use it. What about giving it? What's the din of giving non-mavushal wine to someone who doesn't keep Shabbos in public? Yeah, Michal Shabbos b'farhes. Yeah. I may have repeated this on this forum when the Sadigere Rebbe, going back 40 years ago, he was by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him he received the Rebbe was talking about the Mesiras Nefesh of Yidden in Russia, And the Rebbe said he received a question of a Yid who said he writes, I have to go to work on Shabbos, but I don't work. But as far as everyone else is concerned, I'm going to work on Shabbos. So I'm not Mechal Shabbos before Hesia. In other words, I am before Hesia, I'm Mechal Shabbos, although I'm not really Mechal Shabbos. So they asked the question, in other words, the public profile is Mechal Shabbos, although in truth he isn't. So he asked the question whether he's allowed to make Kiddush and wine. Is he Mechal Shabbos? The fact that people think he's Mechal Shabbos, does that disqualify him from making Kiddush and wine? So the Sadegei Rebbe asked the Rebbe, so what did you answer? And the Rebbe says, that's not the point which I wanted to bring out. And the Rebbe didn't answer the halacha. But meanwhile, this is actually a question which is discussed in Poskim. Let's say you are a rabbi who's officiating at a wedding, and the Chosn and Kala are known to you as not Shomer Shabbos at all. Are you allowed to give them wine under the chuppah? You give them the wine, so then it's Mechal Shabbos, it's touch the wine, becomes also. So this is the question which is being dealt with. So this is actually a quote from the Sefer Nesivim Shnei Shlichus, volume 3. Some do have a problem of giving a cup of wine, which is not mevushal, to a mumer who doesn't keep Shabbos, because as soon as he takes the wine, it becomes osir. But for the majority of Mechal Shabbos nowadays, many are matir, and in the notes we have various reasons, or various sources where they're matir for various reasons. Some say that there's no issue of lifnei iver by a mumer. So it's not such a clear story. Of course, the simplest thing is therefore in a Beis Chabad you use yain mevushal. But is there an issue to give it to a person who's not mechal, who's a mechal Shabbos for Hesia? It would be preferable not to, but there's a tzad l'hokil also. Let's go on to the next question. Right. So one of our regular listeners wrote to me about a person who is in hospital and needs sometimes to have some help. And there's a buzzer. Every patient's got a buzzer next to them. Are you allowed to press the buzzer on Shabbos to get attention? So I answered him, that you are allowed to press the buzzer kilachayat. And I want to share with you this halacha. It's such an important halacha. That the Alter Rebbe, it's a chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. Other poskim don't necessarily take this view, but according to the Alter Rebbe, we have a massive chiddush, the kula, and that is you are allowed to do even. Let's read it inside. A person is bedridden, or mitzvah kol kach, is enduring such pain. It's not functioning. This is completely. So then, even though he's managed to walk around, but he basically is feeling totally not normal. You're not allowed to do even Isad Rabbanon in a normal way. With a shino, you're allowed to. So you're allowed to do Isad Rabbanon with a shino. If you're doing with a shinui, even if it's a melacha gemura, you're allowed to do. In other words, even melacha deraisa, if you do it with a shinui, in a different way, you're allowed to. A person who's got he has to have some milk for some reason, and he's allowed to suck the milk from the udder of a cow, which is discussed elsewhere. No, and he says, because you don't normally milk by sucking the cow, you milk into a bucket. So you're sucking the milk directly, so that's a shinui. So you're allowed to do a issa deraisa with a shin. So this is a very, very useful halacha, that the patient is allowed to press the button, even if you say electricity is deraisa, you're allowed to press the button with a shinui. Now let's say the patient needs to use the bathroom, the toilet, and that's got a sensor. So again, or before getting there, to get off the bed, you've got this pad with an up, down, etc. So to get off the bed, allowed to press that pad with the back of their fingers, with the knuckles, to get off the bed, on the bed. It's called tzorcha hachoila, and they're allowed to do so kilachayad. What about using the bathroom? And the light goes on when you come in. So I would say you would enter the bathroom walking backwards. I think we've gone through this before on this forum. You enter with a shinui, and you leave with a shinui. So whatever you, and then I would take this even further, that if you're visiting someone who's unwell, and visitation is important for the chayla, so then you have always these sensors and etc. So again, we can use this heter. If it's sorche hachayla, you would be allowed to do an isra min haTorah kil achayad. So if you come to, and you, of course, we don't. We're going to be careful about this. We'll come to the door, and there's a sensor there. Wait a couple of minutes. If no one else is passing through, so then turn around, walk backwards towards the sensor, and you go in and help the chayla. And the same thing, whatever it may be, is associated with the needs of a chayla, so you're allowed to do it in kila chayad. Okay, so now this is feedback from last week. We had discussed the story of a young man who was married and divorced shortly thereafter, and he feels uncomfortable. He wants to kind of blank out that experience, and he doesn't want to wear talis for davening. Also, he didn't want to wear kapota. Well, let's deal. So there's someone asked me, what's the story? How does this compare to the case of a woman who was divorced, who was married and divorced, and about covering her hair or not covering her hair? So before reading in the Shulchan Aruch, I want to make it clear this is a totally different story. There's a difference between when you do something because Shulchan Aruch says you have to do so, and if you do something because you've chosen to do so, elected. If you do something because Shulchan Aruch says you have to do it, that's not a question of neder. That you didn't eat chametz on Pesach. It comes out to Pesach, you're eating chametz. Neder. You didn't eat chametz because you're not allowed to. After Pesach, you're allowed to. It's not a question of neder. If there is any room, so why does a woman cover her hair when she's married? Because there's a chiyuv to cover her hair. If there's any room for her hair to take off her covering afterwards, it's not a question of neder. It's a question whether she's allowed to, whether she is obliged to cover her hair or not. But it's not a question of neder. By contrast, putting on a talus for davening is an extra. And once he started, so that it's hanhoga toiva, and then becomes like a neder, and to stop doing so becomes a question of hataras nedarim. And I'm not sure whether that's possible. But because it was brought up, I want to, and there are those rumors out there that it's okay for a divorced woman to take off her sheitel. So I want to read this in Shulchan Aruch. So this is in Even Ezer Simcha of Aleph, Sif Beis. Loisi lachno b'nois Yisrael pruos roish b'shuk, achas pnuyo v'achas eshes ish. A Jewish woman should not go with her hair uncovered in the street, whether she is single, whether she is married. Let's read the two Meforshim, Chelkas Mechoykig in the Beis Shmuel. When he says Penuya, he says Be'ula Ka'ama, that she's been married. Avol Besulo, if she's a virgin. So then, on the contrary, we have the mission in the beginning in Ksubis. It says Yoitzes Behenuma Bareisha Prua. And she's allowed to, when she goes to the wedding, she goes out with her hair uncovered. And then we have also the Beis Shmuel says the same thing. When it says Penuya has to have her hair covered, that's talking about a widow or a grusha or divorcee. So she's now single, but she has to cover her hair. But if she's a psula, if she's a single girl and never been married, then she doesn't have to cover her hair. So that's very clear. The Shulchan Aruch says clearly that an unmarried woman who has been married does have to cover her hair. So where does it come from, this so-called heter of not covering her hair? So there are two tshuvas in Igros Moshe. One is about a widow, and one is about a divorcee, and they are different circumstances. One is the widow. She wants to get a job in an office, and for some reason she's unable to get a job in an office if she's wearing covering her hair. I don't understand why a sheitel wouldn't work, but that's the question as it was. So Reb Moshe goes into Lomdus, there's a shir of Das Yehudis and Das Moshe. He basically is saying that the chiyuv to cover her hair when she's single would be a chiyuv d'Rabbanon, and you can't put a chiyuv d'Rabbanon in place of her having to feed her family. So basically, that's his heter. Only lemamash l'tzoyrech haparnos if she can't feed her family otherwise. And similarly, with the case of the grusha, she wants to remarry, and she's worried that she's concerned that people should see her as eligible. If they see her as the first glance will see her as married, so then people won't even be interested in her. Like this, they'll think she's single. When they're not interested, then of course she won't hide it when it comes to it. That's the scenario discussed in the second Shuv of Reb Moshe. And he does give her a heter, but he says mamash only for this reason, etc. Only when there's mamash at tzorech. So again, what Reb Moshe has given a certain window of heter, mamash at tzorech, that this is doicha that, etc. It's not a simple heter at all. And that's why I thought it was important to discuss this. The basic din of Shulchan Aruch is that there's a chiyuv to cover, and Reb Moshe is talking about one thing being doicha the other, kind of thing. Okay. Let's go on to the next question. All right. So gearing up for Yom Kippur, for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur by night, in the Slichus, which I said after Ma'ariv, so we have this piyut of Da'akecha Elokeinu. So it says, now what you have on where I'm pointing to, on the lower right, is a copy from the original Chabad Machzer. So let me clarify something, that the Machzer which we have, I think was published in the year Tovshin Tesvov, approximately. Before that, in, I think Tovshin Tes, was published a thin, like a companion Machzer, which you'd use a siddur, and for the piyutim, etc., you'd open the Machzer. It was, I have a copy of it, an original copy of this, but the earliest Chabad Machzer as such was published around Tofresh Ayin Aleph by Rabbi Bichovsky. I'm not sure whether it was printed in Berditchev, etc. But the Chabad Machzer which we have is largely a copy of Bichovsky's edition. Now, so here we have this Da'akecha Elokeinu, and then we have a second phrase, L'ma'ancho, and then we've got this phrase, Tala Arucho L'ole Nidov, and then we repeat Da'akecha. When it says repeat Da'akecha, does it mean repeat Da'akecha and L'ma'ancho, or just the phrase Da'akecha? Now, I know the song, because we had Chabad Nigins, Da'akecha Elokeinu, I say, yeah, so people tend to, the second time also, have another shot at it, and they say Da'akecha, and they sing L'ma'ancho also. But it's been pointed out to me that it's not totally accurate. And let's trace what's happening over here. If you take a non-Chabad Machzer, you'll see how much of their Machzer we are missing out. There's in the Machzorim, typically there's the big writing and the small writing, and the big writing is more what's said universally, and the small writing, many miss it out, not only in Chabad. I remember once reading the Kvar Chabad, there's someone called Ravitcher Mendel Liss. So he describes how back in Russia, so they had the Chazan, and there was someone next to him who was saying, Dozak Mayod, Dozak Manisht. He was kind of telling the Chazan which pieces we do say, which we don't say. So, right, so what happened, what's the history of this Da'akecha poem? So if you can see here, this is from a Machzer, older Machzer. So it says here you have a piyut, Omnum Hashomeinu Anchois Asher Aleph, and then after this piece, Da'akecha Elokeinu. Then the next piece is a base, Davercho, Mirmo, and after that would be, you'd say L'mancho, and then it goes through. You see this one, the Vov, after the Vov, you'd say L'mancho, after the Zayin, you'd say Da'akecha, after the Ches, you'd say L'mancho, and then after the Tesh, you'd say Da'akecha. So you got this poem, which was here it's only going on to Yud. In some Machzorim goes the whole Aleph base, and it was like the chorus. one chorus is Lamancha and one is Darkacha, back and forth. And so in our minhag, we don't say the whole piyut. We're not saying the entire piyut, but the only piece which has remained by us from the entire piyut is the letter Tov. And that is, as you see, Tala Arucha, Tinochem, Tashlich, Tira. Now, so what's happened over here is, the beginning of before the poem, we say the two pieces, Darkacha, Lamancha. Then we say Tala Arucha, after which we come back to say Darkacha. But there's no need to repeat Lamancha. There's my Shver Shalom, Rabbi Sudak, pointed out once that there's a recording of the Rebbe singing Darkacha, and like again and again the Rebbe kind of, the Olam, you used to go after he see also on there, and there's a Darkacha again and Darkacha again. Each time the Rebbe is kind of repeating it about 10 times. He repeats Darkacha. He doesn't want to go on to the next piece of Lamancha. If you look at the wording, the Darkacha finishes off an upbeat. Talking about the praise of the Eibishter. What is the end of Lamancha? Look at us, we're standing poor and empty. So it's quite a low-key kind of thing. So all of this put together would explain why it seems to be more appropriate not to repeat Lamancha, just to say Darkacha. Having said that, and I saw in a number of Machzorim that they only have Darkacha afterwards. So this skipping is not only Chabad. I looked in the Redelheim Machzer, it says most Kehillas don't say the whole thing, and they would have, and they're just afterwards just the piece of Darkacha. But other Machzorim which have Darkacha and Lamancha afterwards. So if you've been doing it that way, so then you're in good company. But L'chayra in Svara, the more correct way is to say just Darkacha. The second time. I'm reading now from one of the Rabbi, Mr. Rabin, Lionel Rosenfeld, who was at Marble Arch Shul and much earlier in Edgware, would use our Machzer because it had everything the non-Lubavitchers would say and did not have what they missed out anyway. Yes, it made life easier. You don't have to worry about what to skip and what not to skip. Okay, I've got one last question which came in today. And that is, someone asked, as far as Shechionu goes, well, we have a bit of a problem. Baruch Hashem, we have this problem. What's eligible for Shechionu? Because we import fruit from all over. So what kind of fruit can you use for Shechionu? I think Moshe also has a tshuva. He talks about this. Shechionu has to be on a fruit which has been out of season, be unavailable. In these aisles, cherries. There's a time when cherries, there's plenty of cherries available. There's a time when they're not available. So the kind of thing which is out of season, in season. It doesn't matter whether you had it before, since last Rosh Hashanah. Question is whether it's been unavailable because it was out of season and now it's become available. So, yeah, not every fruit is eligible for Shechionu, fine, but there are some Shechionu fruit out there. There's a whole business in Halacha, in Siman Tov Reish, that because of a sofek, so the second night of Rosh Hashanah, we should try to have a Pri Chodesh, and we have the Pri Chodesh, it has to be a fresh fruit. The dried fruit doesn't work for Pri Chodesh because it has to be something which is clearly a new season. If it could have been, you can't take a can and open it up and use it for Pri Chodesh. Pri Chodesh has to be that it's obviously from the new season. Okay, so this fellow asks the following question: what is if he has only a pomegranate? This is his Pri Chodesh. Now, pomegranate is also a food which is used for Siman Tov. So now he asks the question: should he use the pomegranate on first night for Siman Tov, or should he keep it for the second night for Pri Chodesh? That was his question. I did not find an answer for this in Sforim, but I'm taking my own Svara. The following: the inyonim of Siman Tov are written in the Gemara. So Gemara, I think Gemara in Erkin, it says one should eat these various foods for a Siman Tov. So the concept of eating a Pri Chodesh, you're eating various foods for Siman Tov is a concept which is mentioned in the Gemara. The idea of a Pri Chodesh, and if you don't have a Pri Chodesh, you still say Shechianu. It's the whole thing, a question whether the second day of Yom Tov is a new day or not a new day. And the halacha is, if you don't have a Pri Chodesh, you still say Shechianu. So the second night of Rosh Hashanah, where we endeavor to have a Pri Chodesh, if you don't have a Pri Chodesh, you will still say Shechianu. So my take on it is, if the Siman Tov is a thing we mentioned in Gemara, the Shechianu fruit, the fruit for Shechianu is Mechatese. I think the Alter Rebbe's Lashon is Yesh Noagin even. He's kind of gives it to its initial Yiferlach. So my take is better to have the pomegranate the first night and not worry about Pri Chodesh for the second night. That was my take on it. If someone has views otherwise, I'm happy to hear. Meanwhile, we'll stop a few minutes early, and I wish you all a good Shabbos and a Ksiva v'Chsima Tova, Shana Tova Masukha.
Good Shabbos.